Are you wondering why your podcast interviews are not reaching the audience that you had hoped for? Do you bring on guests on your show only for them to not share your episodes at all or want to talk about your content once it has gone live? This conversation is going to be really important today because there is a reason for that. And we're diving into it with my guest for part 3 of this series, Jason Cercone. Welcome back to As It Relates to Podcasting. I'm really excited to have you here today because in this episode, we explore why guests do not share their podcast interviews and provide valuable tips on building relationships with your guests after the recording is done. We talk about why not sharing your podcast episode is, in fact, a waste of time, a waste of your time, and the importance of having an open mind when it comes to promoting your show. This is, again, like I said, just such an amazing conversation. I know you will get so much out of it. I actually had a huge mindset shift throughout this conversation. I have some really strong opinions about guesting and sharing episodes and all of that. And I had a really big mindset shift towards the end of our conversation that you might want to stick around for. But Jason is amazing. He's incredible. He is a podcast branding strategist, author, and experienced podcaster. And he helps value-driven coaches and consultants establish authority and become thought leaders in their niche via strategic and impactful podcast guest appearances. He is also the host of The Voice of Evolution of Brand, which you can find the link to in the show notes below. So let's get into this conversation. Whether you are a seasoned podcaster or just starting out, I know that this episode will help you create that compelling content and build relationships with your guests that will leave your listeners coming back for more. So don't miss out on this conversation to take your podcast to the next level and to ensure and help ensure that your guests will share their episodes once they're live. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the podcast, Jason. Thank you for joining me for this series.
So glad to be back in the studio with you. It's been fun so far.
I know, it's been really fun. I love conversations like this. Anytime I get to chat about podcasting, it just energizes me in a way that no other thing ever really does. So thank you for being on this series with me. I'm really, really loving it. We're talking about in this episode what to do with your episode when it goes live. And when we were putting together this series, the initial thought that I had in my mind was, it's great to be a podcast guest and it's great to be a host that has all of these amazing guests on your show. Mm-hmm. But then what do you do with it once it goes live? People don't tend to share it. How do you promote it? How do you make sure your content is impacting other people and like reaching other people? All of these different pieces are all so important.
Yeah, absolutely. When you have this new piece of content out there, and I know this is one of the big gripes that podcasters have is that once they throw their episode or once that episode goes out there and they throw the guest all of this information to share and links and assets, imagery, videos, you name it, it's radio silence.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'll never understand. And I'm not even speaking from the fact that you should share. It's a nice thank you to that podcaster, but more so for your own purposes, that content will help solidify in people's minds that you are the resource that they're putting trust in and they're doing the right thing.
Yep.
The more you can talk about what you're helping people gain transformation in, the more they're going to believe in you and want to continue to support you. Maybe, just maybe, that last podcast interview you did is the message that somebody needs to hear to finally say, yep, I'm ready to buy. Mm-hmm. But if you don't share that content and put it in front of them, if they don't follow that podcast, they're not going to know it exists. This content is a great piece of social proof that tells everybody you know what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
You are in demand. You were asked to be a part of this podcast because you have value to offer. And you now have this piece of content that for all intents and purposes, someone else did the heavy lifting for you by putting it together and doing all the post-production work, creating all these assets. In some way, shape, or form, you need to let your audience know that it exists. Social media, email, website, combination of all three. You're missing golden opportunities if you don't do that. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to flip this on its head as we continue this conversation because I want people to look at this a little bit differently. So the listener that's tuning into this podcast, if they've been wondering why this is a blight on the podcasting face, They're going to learn about it today. So like I said, we'll dive deeper as we continue.
I'm excited because I also want to flip this on its head. Absolutely. I have my own opinions about all of this, and we're going to go there. Why do you think that people don't want to promote their episodes?
Well, there's a number of different factors. And I mean, I've encountered this to a small degree. And sometimes you can nip it in the bud by doing that initial research. I won't name the show because overall the conversation was great. But what I learned, because they reached out to me to ask me to be on the show, and I very rarely will say no unless it's so far off the beaten path from what I'm talking about normally that it makes zero sense. Then I'll typically say yes. And also I'll look at other people that I trust in my circle. If they've been a part of that show, I feel that it makes sense for me too. And in this case, what I learned was there's a lot of other stuff that went along with it that just it was all over the map. So I'm struggling with the best way to share that with my audience so they get the most value from it. That can happen. That's more of a rarity. I think the biggest reason why people don't share the content once it goes live is because they've moved on. They have done a number of other interviews. They've done a number of other initiatives, maybe not even related to podcasting. And their initial excitement and that priority of making a great guest appearance is not as high as it was the day of the actual recording, this is one of the reasons why I wanted to flip this on its head, because there's a very important process that you can do to keep them excited.
Okay.
But that's one of the big reasons I feel that people are onto other things, and that excitement that they have for the day they're recording may not be as exciting. It may not be as exciting to them because they've got other interviews out there. Maybe 5 of their interviews went live on the same day. How do you share all that content? Like, again, there are ways, of course, but in their minds, they might be thinking, well, I'm not going to be able to post all of this because then I'm just flooding my audience. This is where I want to flip this on its head. I feel this is very important. And this is what I wanted to challenge you with, Simona, as we talked about before we started recording. I know your policy. So I'm going to ask you this question. So before I ask this question, why don't you share your process in making sure that your guests engage with this content and share it once it goes live?
Okay, so let me preface this with the fact that I'm not as harsh as it sounds, okay? And this is more for... Actually, no, it's for myself as well. I was about to say, like, it's more for my clients than it is for me because of what their goals are and like what they want to achieve with their show. But that's not true because I do it for myself too. I get so many requests for my podcast. I guess the name Happiness Happens. And like I get requests for this podcast too, but this podcast, I am so intentional with who I bring onto the show because we're doing a guest series. You know what I mean? It's 4 episodes. It's a commitment.
Right.
I'm very specific about who I bring onto this podcast. The other podcast, Happiness Happens, I like to interview, all kinds of people to hear all kinds of stories because it's a different intention. It's a different goal for the show. I get pitches all day long for that podcast. And so I'll take a look at different guests, and some people, they sound really amazing. And I think over the years, what's happened is I just get so many pitches. I would have these people on my podcast. We'd have great conversations, and then no one would ever share the episode. And then I started thinking to myself, I'm like, why am I taking up a guest spot for a conversation that didn't have as much reach as my other conversations have had? Why am I taking up a guest spot for someone who doesn't value my show, doesn't value my time, doesn't value our time together, and doesn't want to share it with their audience? Like, for me, I was just like, no, I don't want to do that anymore. Right. So then I put in this, like, I won't put it in quotation marks, policy. It's not really a policy, but it's just a standard that I have. And now when people reach out for my podcast, I mean, there's only 52 weeks in a year, right? That's only 52 amazing guests that you can have on your show per year.
If you're doing a once a week show. If you're doing a
weekly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which this podcast is on a weekly basis. Okay. And most of my client podcasts are the same as well.
Okay.
So I just started responding and saying, this guest sounds absolutely amazing. I would love to have them on the podcast. I do get a lot of requests for my show, which is the truth. It's not a lie. Would so-and-so, if it's a pitch from an agency, for example, would so-and-so be willing, to commit to sharing the episode when it goes live, sending it to their newsletter and talking about the podcast, like talking about the episode? If not, Thank you so much. I totally understand. And I wish you all the best. You know what I mean? It's not like you have to be a guest on, like, if I still want you to, like, how do I phrase this? Like, of course I still would love to have the conversation, but if they're going to say no, then that to me feels more self-serving on their end than as a common goal of creating a show together. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I see those conversations as a big collaboration and a way that you can share your message in a really impactful way. And I want my guests to have that same value. I'm not going to force them to have it, but I only want to bring on people who value that the same way that I do.
Okay.
Whew, that was long-winded. Let me catch a breath.
Well, I want to dissect this. So let's start with the fact that your heart is in the right place. I feel
Thank
that
you.
the collaborative nature of podcasting should extend beyond the recording itself.
Right.
Now, when I come into this type of environment, and this is something that I would teach other guests to do as well. Also, on the host side, you should be thinking this way as well about the value of the content that you're creating. This is not just about the interview that's taking place or the conversation that's taking place. What we're doing is we're cultivating a relationship.
Yes.
We want to build a relationship. You are coming into this with the mindset of, I want to connect with this person on a level to where we can continue to collaborate down the road. It's not just about what we're doing today. Maybe they have people they can refer to me. Maybe I have people I can refer to them. Maybe they have a possibility that they would bring my product into their podcast with an affiliate tie to it.
Right.
Again, all things that can be discussed, but the conversation has to be impactful and there has to be some chemistry so you can continue to move that conversation down the road. So this is where I feel a lot of it gets lost. How much time do you have between when you record your episode and when it goes live? What's your typical turnaround time?
Oh my goodness. I record in blocks. So I have some episodes that I recorded last February and March that haven't gone live yet.
Wow. Okay. So almost a year.
But this is what happens because absolutely. Because I get so many requests for my show that it's so far out.
Okay, I was not expecting that because typically
I know. Typically it's a few months or like, a few weeks or whatever.
Typically, the window that I would hope that a release would happen in is about 3 months at a max. Yeah. Now, am I guilty of having a couple go a little longer than that? Sure. Yeah. I just feel what happens if it goes way too long is a person could have completely pivoted.
Yeah, that's fair.
So when their episode goes live, they may not even be doing what they were talking about in that episode. Anymore. So there is a small time factor to it, but this is the most important element. So let's say that you had a 3-month turnaround. You recorded in January. It's going to go live at the beginning of April. What type of contact have you had with that guest in between?
Probably none.
And there is the reason why they don't care.
That's fair.
You have to take this as it's nothing more than the first step in the entire process is this conversation and this recording. You have to take it to the next level. The magic happens when the mic goes off, in my opinion. That's the green room conversation, the conversation that you have with that person. That's where you start plotting world domination together. If you just created some kick-ass content that the audience is going to sink their teeth into, you turn off the microphones and now you take the next step.
Yeah.
Maybe if I have a podcast, I want to invite you on my show. Do you have anybody in your circle that could use this information we talked about today? I'd love to be introduced to them. And of course, I would take care of you with an affiliate commission, something. Again, plotting this out and thinking of it more on a level of just doing an interview starts to spark the relationship. Then you have to actually follow up on that. So you have to immediately, what I do whenever I finish an interview, go to LinkedIn. That's where I play the most. So I go and find them on LinkedIn, connect with them on LinkedIn right away. Now I can start interacting with their content. I can start sharing their content and vice versa. We are doing the relationship building things that human beings do.
Yeah.
My process is this. We have that conversation. I prep them when the interview ends that I'm going to be sending you a quick survey because I want to make sure I'm getting better and I want to make sure you had a good experience. If you could take a couple seconds to fill that out, I'd greatly appreciate it. Then a few days later, I'm going to send you a request to connect off the mic. Let's have a conversation without the task of creating a podcast, and we'll continue to build on this green room moment.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows what can happen.
I love
But you
that.
have to take those steps, and you have to be in their lives, even to a small degree, if you expect them to be as excited as you are the day you release their episode. I'm telling you, I've seen a major difference in doing this. And I also think back to, I have lost contact with people, and when I put their episode out and then hear nothing, I blame myself
Yeah.
because I know I didn't hold up my end of the bargain. So that's a major piece that many podcasters miss. Of course, the content's good. You want to back it with all of your power and all of your might. But to get that person to be just as excited as they were the day they recorded, you've got to have a relationship in place. Just like the person, to some degree, I'm going to say this, it's a little tongue in cheek, but you haven't heard from a person in a year, but you own a pickup truck. And now all of a sudden they text you out of nowhere, hey, what's going on? And you're just like, nothing. And you know the next text is going to be, I've got to move a couple washing machines this weekend. Can I borrow your truck or can we use your truck? It's like you don't ever have any contact with that person until you need something.
True.
So you have to think of your podcast guest on the same level. You have to treat them as a new, valuable asset in your life and just keep up the conversation. You don't have to talk to them every day. You don't have to interact with them every day. We don't do that in life, right? But maybe you come across an article that you were reading and it reminded you of the conversation, and you just shoot them a message saying, hey, saw this article. It made me think of our conversation. Hope all is well. It's just another way to communicate, but it takes this experience to a whole new level, and it can up the excitement that guest when things go live, or the excitement that guest has when things go live.
See, that's a little challenging for me, though, to be honest with you. First of all, like so when I'm interviewing for my Happiness Happens podcast, I don't know how to explain this. Like, I'm not like a life coach or anything like that. You know what I mean? And I know that the relationship can build into so many different ways, but I don't always want to continue on with somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, it was a great conversation, and like that's kind of what it was. You know? So sometimes I don't know. And like I try and be very mindful of like my own time and like how much time am I giving to different conversations that may or may not go anywhere. You know what I mean? And that might be a little bit close-minded, but my days are so full, you know, and it just doesn't feel like there's space in my life right now to be able to do that. And so in my mind, like I totally get that, but I actually like, I think if I was on the receiving end of that, like unless I knew the person a little bit better, I don't think that I would feel like I need to get on a call with them. You know what I mean? Like, unless it's if it was you and I, that's a totally different story because like we've chatted like a few times now. I just am I'd be like, yeah, sure, I can chat with you in April. You know what I mean? Or like May.
I'm not saying you rearrange your life to make time for this person, nor do you drop everything. I mean, again, it can be as simple as just whatever social media network you're on the most, go follow them there.
Yeah,
go make a connection there. And it's more than just radio silence for a few months and then saying, oh, hey, your episode's live. Get pumped up. You got to share this because I'm just, again, it's opening up lines of communication. And does it work every time? No, I don't expect every single guest that I have on my show to join me for a call off the mic. I've had a few, but I'm always going to offer it. Not every, it's just the same as the survey. They don't have to fill it out. It's just the same as us asking for a review or asking for them to share. They aren't obligated, but I want to do my part. And if they follow through, maybe that's somebody that sees value in my message. And now it opens up a new world of opportunities. You never know unless you take that step.
It's so true. It's very, very true.
That's how I look at the whole process. This to me is a phenomenal way to meet a new person and have a conversation on a very level playing field, because it could be a person that's accomplished 1,000 times more anything I've done up to this point.
Yeah.
But in this moment, we're on the same playing field, just having a good conversation because we're working collaboratively to build something that our audiences are going to love. I just want to see if we can take that to another level. It's the same. Like I look at, if I ask a girl on a date, she may say yes, she may say no. But okay, we're just going to move on and keep trying. You know what I mean?
You've shifted my mindset about this to be honest with you. I mean, I'm still going to have that requirement on my show because I still like it is important to me. You know what I mean? Like because at the end of the day, I think really what it comes down to is I value my time so much that if you don't value the time we spend together in an equal way and you don't have any intention of sharing the episode, there, then maybe it's not worth my time to have the conversation. Do you know what I mean? And it also depends on it really depends on who the person is though too. If it's like, if it's a massive industry leading guest, different story. You know what I mean? It really is. Like, and I don't mean that in like a rude way at all. It just is. And if it's someone who really doesn't have any footprint at all in the online space and you don't want to share the episode, it's probably going to be a no for me.
See, and that's where
it's situational.
It is and it isn't. I mean, I'm going to respectfully disagree with what you're saying because I'm not looking at a person in regards to stature. I'm looking at them in regards to the value they can bring my audience. I'm thinking listener first. Yeah. So whether or not
but I think you need to be online though in this day and age. Like you need to have some kind of footprint online.
I don't disagree with that, but I will go back to what we said at the beginning, and I will say that as the guest, your end of the bargain is that you should be sharing this content because it can benefit you as well. There is no reason to completely ignore it. In some way, shape, or form, there's got to be some value, or else you wouldn't have made the appearance. I mean, again, I will say this. I did have one appearance that I don't know how this happened, but when I don't even know how it went live, but when I went and listened, I sounded like a robot.
Oh.
And I knew that when we connected, he told me, well, we're having a huge rainstorm here right now. And I'm like, do you want to do this later? Then no, we'll be good. And the whole time his video was choppy and cutting in and out. And then he aired the damn thing.
Oh, no.
And I sounded like I was talking like this. And I mean, like, I knew I was mic'd well. I always check that. So like that I can understand. Like, I'm not going to subject my audience to that because there's no value there. But on the grand scheme of things, when you look at this entire process of leveraging podcast guesting to build your brand, the sharing is one of the most important aspects because that's the social proof that you're putting together. But somebody else is doing all of the heavy lifting for you. Like, there's beauty in that.
Exactly.
Your expertise is center stage. You should never shy away from putting it in front of your audience unless there is some kind of technical glitch like I just explained. Right. So, like I said, I mean, I can sympathize with your point and see exactly why you would have that policy in place. But again, when I'm talking to people, my goal is to educate them to understand the process from A to Z, not just A to Q.
No, that's fair.
And that's where, again, a lot of the disconnect and miscommunication that happens in the podcast space is just because we aren't taking the next step in building a relationship. Yeah. And if you can put that into play, and even in the smallest of terms, it can make a difference.
Yeah. No, you know what? It is a very, very good point. And it's not one that I've ever actually considered. So I'm reflecting a lot as we're having this conversation. And I know I'm going to have a lot of aha moments after we're done this conversation. And I will say this from guests that I've had on my podcast years and years and years ago, when I first launched my production company, we built a relationship. And now I think that when I interview someone, I try and make them as comfortable as possible when we get onto the mic. Like, there's no awkwardness. We have a fun time. We laugh, we joke around. At the end of the conversation, it's the same thing. We shoot the shit for a little bit and like, that's good. So I feel like in that sense, it's a little bit memorable. People are like, oh yeah, like that was a really nice time. Like I had a really good time, And then I have, I send thank you emails and I make sure that, they know how great the conversation was. And then I always say, like, I'm going to be in touch when all of the assets are ready to go. Anyways, that's it. Beside the point. When I launched my production company back in 2021, more like officially, because I was still doing production work, but I hadn't really hadn't launched the company officially. I had connected with some of my past guests on Instagram and social media, Facebook or whatever. I launched my services. I booked out in 72 hours, and half of those clients were past previous podcast guests that I had on my show. But I never had done like a whole big thing. I think we were just connected online and we liked each other's stuff and we would comment here and there. So what I'm gathering from this, it doesn't really have to be a big elaborate thing. Right. Just as long as you have those little touch points of communication with that guest.
There's meeting for a drink. There's getting married. Yeah. Those are two big different things.
They
So
very much are.
it's the same mindset bringing all of this together.
Right.
It's a new person in your life. You never know. Some people you may never talk to again. I've experienced that. We all have.
Yeah.
Some people you may talk to on a weekly basis. Many of them may become clients. That's
Yep.
what you're setting up. And just by being a powerful communicator and thinking beyond just that one transaction. I've used that a few times in this series. This isn't about that one-time transaction. It's about everything that you can create together that could be very small
Mm-hmm.
or it could change the world. You never know until you take the next step to building that relationship.
Absolutely. I think, where my mindset sits with all of this too is that I just don't want my show to become like another podcast that someone does as part of their book tour or their whatever launch or,
Yeah.
new program. You know what I mean? So I try and be very intentional with like what are their goals and what are my goals. You know what I mean? So while I will still continue to keep my policy in place for my own self because it's important to me.
Yeah.
I think that this is a very good addition to everything else
Yeah.
that is done behind the scenes because I agree with you. You've shifted my mindset. I stand corrected.
Win.
And I like to be challenged. So this is great.
It's again, it's the policy being what it is. You can absolutely have it in place, but when I think about it is when they share, it's a bonus.
That's fair. That's
Because
a very good
even if
point.
they don't, the way I
You
look
still
at
want to
it
have the
is,
conversation either way.
yeah, I mean, it's powerful content that my audience can get something from. If they don't feel the same, that's on them.
Yeah.
I'm still going to share this content. I would hope that they were just as excited about it. If we've had some communication in between, I think it bridges that gap.
Yeah.
But if they choose not to share it, they choose not to share it. I can't get hung up on that. I just move forward with what I'm doing, and I keep bringing a
Exactly.
valuable product to my audience.
Yeah. When this series, goes live, if you're not sharing it, and I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to come knock on your door. No, I'm just kidding.
Boy, the irony in that, right?
Could you imagine you did it on purpose? No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, I would never do that. I'd be
Oh
wasting my
God.
time. That's how
Yeah.
I mean, yes and
Well,
no. I
that's
mean,
just where my mindset is at. Like, why would you do something and like deliver all this value and like not share it with your audience? Like, to me, it's a missed opportunity.
bingo. That to me is why
Yeah.
I'm doing this. This for me is my way of making new relationships and communicating with new audiences. At the same time, I know this content works for my audience as well, and that's why they have
Exactly.
become my audience. So I'm going to continue to bring value into their world any way I can. So any guest
Absolutely.
appearance I make is going to get shared in some way, shape, or form.
Yay, I can't wait. I value you so much. And I love that we had this conversation. I think this is a very important thing to consider because at the end of the day, it is what we're doing is building relationships. And, I don't think that one person in the entire world has everything in their mind is right. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
this is how we learn, this is how we grow. Offering people a different perspective and being able to have like kind and friendly conversations about things, even when you disagree on some points, but keeping an open mind to let something new come in is so important.
Yep.
Like if I sat here and I was like, nope, like this would be a terrible conversation. People would be like, wow, she's pretty close-minded, but
that's so much of the world we see on social media.
Oh, it drives me nuts.
It's so divisive. Yeah, it's crazy.
So intense.
That's why I don't spend a lot of time there, to be honest, anymore.
Me neither.
If you have a viewpoint and somebody else has the other, there's no middle ground. There's no gray area. You either believe in what I have to say or you don't, and it's nuts. We didn't get to where we are as a society thinking like that.
No.
Yet.
No, you need to have space for other people's opinions.
Yes.
Whether you agree with them or not, like you can still disagree with something and welcome in one point of view of somebody else's and take that as truth for yourself. Like that's okay. I think that comes down to ego though. Like,
Sure.
If you have a lot of ego in your life in general, you're always going to think that you're the only one that's right and there's no space for anything to change. So
absolutely right.
In any case.
Absolutely
okay.
Right.
This was a wonderful conversation. I can't wait to close out our series together.
Me too. Let's keep this good thing going.
I know. Well, thank you so much. You are amazing.
Thank you. Thanks again for having me.
Oh my God, of course. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode with my friend Jason. I know that there is so much value in here that you are going to take away, that you're going to be able to implement in your guesting and hosting journey. I would love if you could let us know your key takeaway from today's conversation. And I would love if you would connect with both of us. All of our links are in the show notes. I want to call out a few really quick. Jason has a guide. It's called The Absolute Guide to Authority Enhancement, which you can find the link to that in the show notes. And you can also connect with him on his website, on Instagram, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, and through his podcast on Facebook or on Twitter. All of those specific links are in the notes as well. Thanks again so much for spending this time with us today. Share this podcast on your social media. Tag us and let us know that you're listening. I love to hear from you. It's one of my favorite things. So I look forward to that. If you feel called, please leave a rating and review of the show. And I cannot wait for you to dive into the next episode.